Okay, so it's what day is it? May what?
21st.
21st. I just wanted to see if Stuff Rider would actually talk before he got on the video. I'm surprised. I didn't know Stuff Rider was coming out. So we're about to do a tour. But the tour is not going to involve much combat. It's going to be about buildings that aren't here anymore. The interesting thing that you should probably watch out for, though, is I don't have a conclusion. So how is it all going to end? I don't know how I'm going to tie it up. Anyway, if you ever want to be a park ranger, it's only 93 degrees without the heat index right now. And it's a hard way to make a living. So if you'd ever like to be a park ranger, come on out, because there's not one tree between me and my car on the other side. Let's go. 6.5, that's right. Maria and I, when I first started this book, Maria and I first started at the park. How many days?
That was a long time ago.
How many days, Maria?
225.
225 days, ladies and gentlemen, till old Maria sails off into retirement. There you go. How about that?
And then I'll come back and volunteer just doing my math.
That's right. She's mellowed a lot too. You know, they'll come in, visitors will come in. We've got another female ranger now, though. But, visitors would come in every once in a while, and they'd be like, complaining. But my point is, when they came in and described, I said, well, who did you have an encounter with? And they'd describe, and I said, well, I know who that was. Right there. She's mellowed. Believe it, she's mellowed a lot right here. You might get some, 20 years ago, you might get some paper for standing on a cannon. Today, you get the horn and she drives on past. Something like that.
Give the old Eric Campbell, get off the cannon!
Get off the cannon! Get off the cannon. Yep.
So before you get started, I'm going to do a safety briefing.
Go ahead.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Brady. I'm one of the law enforcement rangers here at the park, and I'm going to do a little safety briefing before you all head out. The reason I'm doing that is because we've already had one person go to the hospital in an ambulance, and another person who was given a courtesy transport back to their car because of the heat. So, depending which of my weather apps you look at, the heat index is either 89, 93, or 95. Normally I would say, so what? But it's only May, so our bodies haven't had a chance to acclimate to that yet. If you do not have water with you, I encourage you not to go on this hike. If you go on the hike anyway without water, and you pass out halfway through, I reserve the right to say I told you so before I transport you to the hospital. We do have water in the pickup truck. I will be meeting you guys halfway across with some cups. If you don't have water of your own, we can refill whatever containers you have. Our goal here is to make sure that nobody has to go to the hospital and to prevent any heat illness or injury before you all reach that point. Okay? Have a good hike.
Don't make her come back. Right?
Don't make me climb in the back seat of this
If you
car.
would like, you can watch the video of the Devil's Den anniversary walk. Was that for the 150th? And we had a gentleman cut his finger. And here comes Maria, all the way back down. You can watch the whole tape of what a ranger has to do to spend time for 30 minutes. Here. I guess it's time, huh? I keep forgetting. I'd like everybody to show. I'd like to show everybody my new bling that a friend of mine gave me last night, and he assured me that it's what everybody wanted to see. Right there. So when I pose for a picture, you know, with like Dan or something, it may seem awkward, but it's going to be something like this. Except I'd like a shorter ranger in order to do that too, right? So.
We'll get John Nicholas.
Get John Nicholas, that's right. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to Gettysburg National Military Park, if my new watch is correct here. We're going to do a walking tour. We're going to go straight across this field. As Maria just told you, there's not a, well, she didn't tell you, but it's strangely obvious, there's not a lick of shade. Not one lick, as they would say, of shade. That's funny, I'm using that word again. I was just using that with my, with Angie about Ben. I was saying he needs a job. says, she goes, why don't you ask him? I said, if I ask him, he ain't gonna hit a lick at a snake all summer long. Now, the one thing I need to stress to you right now on behalf of Dan and I, this is not, I know it's just become common Gettysburg language, you know, just universal language. We are not doing a battle walk, in case you didn't watch the program description here. We're doing farms that are I don't know, we struggled with the title. What was the final title, Dan?
I think something like they once lived here, Gettysburg's Forgotten Stories.
We're concentrating mostly on farms that are no longer here and buildings that are no longer here. However, there is one that we're going to view, and that will be the conclusion. Now, you'll never guess which one if you look right across the field. So it should be titled Mostly Farms That Aren't Here Anymore. Tour Incorporated. Okay? All right, so I'll be doing a couple of stops. I'll let Dan describe his own in just 1 second. We'll be just going straight across the field, just like Pettigrew's division, Davis's brigade. We're going to go through the Bliss farm. I'm going to cover the Bliss farm, then we're going to go on up. We're going to cross the road. Dan will fill in. He's got a few stops in between. Then we're going to cross the highway, get over to the opposite side, the Union side, as I would term it around here. And then we'll have the Cyclorama Center and a couple other farms that are no longer there. I've had a really, really good time researching this stuff. I really have. It's taken me into farms are not my bailiwick, okay? So it took me into a new area of the historiography of this park. Is that the right word? And
sure.
I don't know. I've just enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. What are you talking about, Dan?
Well, hello everybody. In case you don't know me, I'm Dan Vermilya. I'm a park ranger out at the Eisenhower site. Being at Eisenhower, it's nice to see a crowd of people. We don't get too many visitors over that way, but it's nice to see everybody today. It's nice to get to tag team with my good buddy Matt here for this program. As he said, it's not a battle walk, so we are focusing on stories that aren't the first ones you necessarily think of when it comes to Gettysburg. Matt's going to be talking about some of the farm families who called Gettysburg home before the battle, some of their experiences. I'm going to be talking more about this landscape and its use in the 20th century. I think, you know, as a national park, yes, Gettysburg is a national military park, but it is also a national park in a broader sense, and that through the years it's been many different things to many different people. It's been home to families. In the 20th century, this was a training grounds for the United States military. It was also home to some German prisoners of war during World War II. So what I'm going to be focusing on is not necessarily the people who lived here in the 19th century, but some of the people who called Gettysburg home, specifically these fields, home in the 20th century. We're going to talk about Camp Colt in 1918, talk a little bit about the 1917 infantry camp as well that was the predecessor of Camp Colt. But we're also going to talk about the prisoner of war camp that was here on this landscape in 1944. So we will try to move at a little bit quicker pace today, in the sense of not leaving everybody in the shade in the sun for 2 full hours. One other thing to mention, there are a couple spots out there. It's hot today, it's humid, it's sunny, but there still are some muddy spots out there, some spots with some pooled water. In case you don't know, this hike was originally supposed to be 2 weeks ago, but we didn't have snorkel equipment, so we moved it to today. So there still is a little bit of mud out there, so watch your footing as we go across the field. Heat is obviously a concern, but so is twisted ankles, so please watch your footing as we head across the field today. So, any questions for us before we get going? I don't have any fancy new bling like Matt, so I can't match that. So.
Right here? You impressed, aren't you? You are. I'm going to have 2 or 3 watching. I pulled up outside, I was lost. This is back in the 1990s. I was selling office furniture, and I was on Highway 49. I think somebody had a blues song called Highway 49. Who was that? Anyway, that'll give you something to look up right there. I was playing that on the cassette player, and I got lost. And I pulled over in the middle of nowhere, and I mean the middle of nowhere. I mean, I was a 3-inch pipe running beside the road that said daylight. Okay, nobody liked that joke. All right, we're in the middle, they pumping daylight in there. All right, so I pull over and there's nobody around. I see this gentleman walking down the road, and I pulled over and I says, "Hey, you mind telling me where Yazoo City is?" He comes up to the car, he looks in the car, and he looks over the car, around, like there's anybody around here. Then he sticks his arm inside. I had the window down, obviously. He sticks his arm inside the car, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Am I about to get robbed? He put his arm inside the car, and he pulled his sleeve back. And all he had in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, was watches. All the way up his arm. And he looked at me and he goes, "You want to buy a watch?" I said, "No." I'm already there. What did that have to do with anything? I don't know, except for lost time. We're going to go across the field. Look, to echo what Dan said, you got to let us know if you're hurt. I got probably 40, 60 people on this tour right now. I can't read you. I don't know. If you start having symptoms, let us know before it's too late, okay? All right, but otherwise, I think we're gonna be fine. I hope everybody's hydrated when we go out here.
Everybody got water? Good.
All right, well, let's take off. We're gonna head down to the Tennessee. Everybody follow Dan. I'm sorry. Hi.
Carla from Connecticut. Can you give me a couple minutes to walk across those fields, man?
Oh, it wants a couple minutes. We've got a tired lady already. See, I asked for it and I got it right here. All right. So this is what you call, right now, while she catches her breath, this is called Ranger Improv. Nobody's impressed by that either. Okay. We'll make sure that you don't have to walk back, okay? So you, all right? So see me at the end of the program.
Well, that's right where they told me to do the National Cemetery lot.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But okay. So your car's on the other end. I see what you. Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am. Well, you'll be there then. All right. So what do we kill time with here?
Well,
I'm talking about the battle, but have you got something else?
how about this? Matt's right. This is Ranger Improv. So this will be a little disjointed in the sense that we're not going to jump right into the battlefield as a training grounds. But just to kind of introduce the idea, as a national military park, Gettysburg has served many different purposes. 100 years ago, there was a large United States Marine Corps training exercise here, just on the other side of these trees here, closer to the Virginia Memorial. You can't really see it perfectly from here, but we're going to talk about it here and kill a little bit of time. So,
Over there in that field of corn.
yeah, over in that field there. Essentially, 1920s, the Marine Corps, they did exercise at Gettysburg. They did an exercise at Antietam where they did a march up from Quantico, did training exercises, did kind of a mock reenactment of these Civil War battles using modern weapons at the time. There were aerial exercises here in 1922. And this Marine exercise here in Gettysburg features about 5,000 Marines. They marched all the way up here from the DC area. There were tents, there was a whole shebang there. President Harding was here to observe the ceremonies and observe the exercises. It was really quite a production. But they were not the first to use this as a training field, of course. We're going to talk about Camp Colt when we go across. A couple other names of individuals who were here. 1909, George S. Patton visited as a West Point officer. He came back a couple years later in 1913 for the 50th reunion, 50th anniversary of the battle. Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., very famous name, who would end up meeting his fate at Okinawa in 1945. He was here in 1913 for the 50th anniversary of the battle as well. 1915, guy we're going to talk about more as we get going, Dwight Eisenhower was here with his West Point class. The class the stars fell on. 59 members of that class went on to be generals in the United States Army. Another member of the class, Omar Bradley, was here with Ike touring the battlefield that year. And again, for the Marine Corps exercises, 1922, a couple other folks who were here, notable names at the time. In addition to President Warren G. Harding, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was the acting Secretary of the Navy, he was here for the Marine exercises. He went on to receive the Medal of Honor for actions at Utah Beach on June 6 of 1944. He himself is buried at the Normandy American Cemetery. Another name that I came across in researching some of this recently that really caught me by surprise. Gettysburg recently applied to be considered as a World War II heritage city. So we were looking through various World War II connections beyond Dwight Eisenhower. But another name that stood out to me was Captain Osami Nagano, who is the attaché of the Japanese Imperial Navy. He was an observer here for the Marine Corps exercises in 1922 along this ridge line, and he ended up being a key planning figure for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. So, a lot of famous names, a lot of famous figures involved in these Marine Corps exercises, and as part of the broader story here of how the battlefield was used in the 20th century. So, kind of a little segue and teaser to what we're really going to talk about as we get going, but something we can certainly mention up here up front.
Okay. What do you think of that? You just don't get, the layers of history on this park are quite something. Yeah. So what can I talk about, Matt? What can you talk about? Well, couple last month, I would say, let's give it about a month, we had the, I hate to discredit them, 82nd Airborne. We had the 82nd Airborne do a drop in the well, if you look behind you, that's the Brown Ranch, that tree line back there, where of course the bus gets in the way. Right when I say that, they were doing a jump into the Brown Ranch, which is technically a portion of the battlefield, even though it's rear line. Well, they missed. And they were jumping out of a helicopter apparently, and half of them, they did 2 jumps, and half of them got hung up. But it was only like 10% of them. So that is a success failure rate that is, they can withstand. So guess what they did? They did it again. So they jumped out of a perfectly good helicopter, and this time they hung themselves up in these trees over here. So that set off a series of events that eventually ended up with the Gettysburg Fire Department coming to the rescue of the United States Army to get those soldiers out of the trees.
I was doing school programs in the cemetery that day, and I thought I was hallucinating because I looked out and I saw parachutes over here by Seminary Ridge, and I thought, surely there's no way there are people parachuting on Seminary Ridge, and sure enough.
Yes. So, what is the moral of this story?
Don't jump out of a good helicopter.
That's right. Or at least tell the National Park Service that you're coming, because we'll have the fire truck ready instead of having to let you hang there for a few hours, okay? Before that happens. All right, where am I? You ready, ma'am? We won't be crossing as fast as you.
All right, I'll try.
Well, we got cover right
To
now.
ride back from here, we have folks that can help with that. I would say if you're on...
I think maybe I should take it right back now. I don't want to pass out on you. Sorry.
Okay,
That's
Sorry.
you're fine.
probably wise.
You're fine, and I think my...
Hey, would you... Why don't you get them going, Matt?
Okay. All right, y'all follow me. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is stalling. All right, because Ranger Dan is trying to find that nice lady a ride back. So we'll kind of limp along right here. So I have no information. I didn't come prepared to talk about this, but it is interesting that I get an opportunity to plug what has taken the park quite a while to accumulate. I'm happy to announce in the last couple of weeks that Gettysburg National Military Park has uploaded on the park website all the correspondence related to the erection of the Southern State Memorials along West Confederate Avenue. If you haven't seen it. Now, before you jump on there and think, you know, there's smoking guns in there, everything. It's basically correspondence on stuff like what kind of granite are we going to use. Some of the more interesting stuff, though, is like when they start corresponding with the park over what they want to place on the monument and the verbiage and how it went back and forth in the 1960s and the 1970s. In particular, I'd have to look up, Tennessee was one of our last monuments. A couple things about the Tennessee monument which are interesting though, is that Tennessee, if you jump online and look at the correspondence, Tennessee formed some kind of, or had some kind of, maybe it wasn't exactly a state agency, I can't figure that out, but they had, for the centennial, they had some sort of military hierarchy, an organization that was set up where, you know, they had like a colonels and majors, and it was set up in a military formation, all basically as the, I'm getting the wrong name here, but the provincial army of the state of Tennessee. But basically what they were doing is trying to get this monument erected. And they hemmed and hawed for a number of years. But the interesting thing about the Tennessee monument is that I guess you would say this is a relief or on here. These soldiers right here were originally supposed to be cast in bronze and placed on a pedestal of some type, just like you would see any other monument. Well, they never got the funding, so they took the monument which they were going to create with the figures, and they just chiseled it into the stone, and that's what you see today. That's why it's located or displayed like it is today. He's here. All right, we're going to take off. Did the volunteer turn around? No, he's still.
Yeah, he's just bringing up the view.
Well, we got a second. Any person that's is willing to come along and attempt this, I feel obligated to not cut them off, you know. So anyway, how about them rebels? All right, let's talk a little bit about before he gets here, for the farm, just to set it up. We're now on the site of the Bliss farm, right here, and you know, to be honest, I don't get out here this much. Why? Because why would I come out here all the time? So I could, oh yeah, sweat. That's right. Well, yeah. My father will never get over that, I don't think. He thinks the most worthless piece of mankind is a government worker. Dan didn't expect that. So when I came out here the other day to scout it out, one of the things, and I've been out here before, but when you don't come out here that often and you start studying, like I took 2 books that I used basically as the background of this stop right here. One was by John Archer, who wrote a little walking tour of the Bliss Farm area, and the other one was by a gentleman named Woody Christ, spelled like Christ, all right? And unfortunately, I knew Woody. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he wrote this delightful little book, and I relied more heavily on that one. And I told John Archer I did, so it's all cool right here. I prefer hardbacks when I get out here. But anyway, the one thing that struck me, what I was driving toward, is the one thing that struck me is that, which would you say? Now you can look at the Confederate side and you can look at the Union side. Which side's the Bliss Farm closer to?
I'm saying Union.
It's the Union side.
Yeah. See, I couldn't make up my mind either. You know, I could get the topo map out, but it would appear that the Union side was, to me, I mean, I could go either way. It's kind of a hard thing to calculate, because we always want, you know, when you get 2 ridges, we always want them to be perfectly parallel to each other. Well, they're not. All right, so this ridge runs that way and this ridge runs that way. So it all depends. People ask me all the time, how far did the Confederates come across this field on Pickett's charge? Well, it's all relevant, isn't it? It all depends on where you start from. And so I would say from here it's probably a little over half a mile to the Union position, probably 6/10, 7/10 of a mile. I based that on because I had one of the nice lady with me on a Pickett's Charge walk over here at the Virginia Monument, and she had a, what do you call? She had a fancy watch.
Smartwatch or
no, it counts things.
GPS?
Yeah, a pedometer. Yeah, one of the Fitbit, and she she tracked it, and it's 8/10 of a mile from the Virginia Monument to the high water mark. So I just shortened that up, and that's what I tell people's answers from there. All this inside ranger knowledge you're getting, only because it's overcast at this very moment. So once again, the theme of this tour is changing from farms that are almost not here to delaying for time, parlaying. All right, any questions? Let me talk to you about William Bliss. William Bliss is born, and this makes him seem so old to me, is born in 1799. Yeah. He marries Adeline Carpenter, and she was born in 1800. And he married her in 1823 on her 23rd birthday, which was, I would think, would be kind of old for to be getting married back then. But he was 24, 23, 24. Now this wedding, or where they first met, and their wedding was in New York. And while they were there, of course, they have a bunch of children, as they did back then. 2 daughters are born in New York. Now William Bliss and his family moves to Bedford County, Pennsylvania in 1826. And there are 3 more children that are born here. Out of the 5 children, 3 will die while living here. Can you imagine? I don't know. In 1835, they moved back to, somebody from New York help me, Sinclairsville, I got that right? You like that, Dan? New York, where 2 more children are born. Dan's totally Ohio, ladies and gentlemen, totally Ohio. Where 2 more children are born. So their children, in order, are Amanda, 1824, 1846, Sarah, 1825 to 1869, James, 1830 to 1835. Yeah, I've got 7-year-olds too, really. And Francis, 1833 to 1921. A little bit better. And then an unnamed baby, 1837. So I guess stillborn, for lack of a better, for any background on it. Now, getting to where we are today, they're going to move to Gettysburg and purchase the farm on April 7th of 1857. So that is 6 years before the battle. Now you talk about coming into a nice spread, or at least I would consider that, especially in today's world. They ended up buying this farm, which included 53 acres, with a home, which is denoted right over here. We see that marker, not the first one, but the second one, right here. And by a nice barn, which is denoted by another marker on the other side of this these flowers right here, and an orchard. Now, what do you think they paid for that? House, barn, orchard, 53.
What year?
1857.
$5,000, $1,200.
I'm
Closer to 12.
I got 15.
All right. $1,960.76. Almost $2,000. And another 7 acres were bought in 1858, which gave him a total of roughly 60 acres. All right. So they were in their early 60s at the time of the battle. And their 2 youngest daughters, Frances and Sarah, live with them. Y'all step right over here. We're not going far. So we were talking about the Bliss farm, and it was purchased in 1857. They eventually have 60 acres. They have 5 children, and 2 of which are going to be living with them here at Gettysburg. At the onset of the battle, the Bliss family fled, quote, leaving the doors open. That's right here, folks. Leaving the doors open, the table's set, and the bed's made, which was nice. You know, you want to be able to pull back the stuff. The children, Francis and Sarah, went to the Jacob Weichert farm. I say children. Francis would have been 30 years old, and Sarah would have been 38 at the time of the battle. So, anyway, the two daughters leave out of here, and they went to the Jacob Weichert farm. Anybody remember where the Jacob Weichert farm is? That's right, behind what? Behind Little Round, the other Weichert. Too many Weicherts right there. And it was behind Little Round Top. What diary, what famous lady wrote memoirs of that place? Tilly Pierce was also located there. Rock on with Tilly, all right? All right? I might make a good band name, you know? And now introducing Tilly Pierce. Yeah, let's go, yeah. My friend, back in the early 1980s, saw David Allan Coe open up for Hank Williams Jr., and he said that David Allan Coe came out on stage with not one, but two tigers, white tigers, on a leash. Now, what kind of man travels with tigers? That's my kind of star right there. Why did I tell you that? I have no idea. Now, at the Jacob Weichert farm, they're going to bake bread and make bandages for the next few days. The Bliss farm, let's get into where we're standing. Once again, the barn and the house, right here where you're standing. The Bliss farm was described by one soldier as this: a large barn. Let's about face so you can actually see what's left of it. It was described as a large barn, almost a citadel in itself. It was expensively and elaborately built structure, 75 feet long and 33 feet wide. It had a basement that was 10 feet high. Now folks, that's a lot of digging, you know? And he had, well, I guess it was already dug when he bought it. The basement of 10 feet high, constructed of stone, and its upper part 16 feet to the eaves.
A lot of overhang.
A lot of overhang. Why would they want that overhang? There was an overhang, this will impress you even more there, cowboy. An overhang that was 10 feet long.
Shade.
There's your shade. There were 5 doors in the front wall of the basement and 3 windows in each end.
There's your ventilation.
There's your ventilation. All right, it's facing this way. Wind's blowing. You see how the wind's blowing this way? 90 paces north of the barn was the mansion. Can anybody figure out where 90 paces are? Right over here. It was a frame building, 2 stories in height, as it had a front of 3 rooms width and 2 front doors. And there now remain, he's writing in the present tense, and there now remain 2 cellar excavations, which obviously are no longer there. Chaplain H.L. Stevens of the 14th Connecticut, who we'll be talking about shortly, said, quote, it was a 2-story weatherboarded frame and log house, a front of 3 rooms width with 2 front doors and a length of about 50 feet between the two. Okay, now as I told you at the beginning, this is not a battle walk. This is supposed to be about the farms. But the Bliss farm, out of all the farms that are involved within the confines of what will become known as the Gettysburg Battlefield, I think you would be hard put, maybe one of the last stops we make up there, but you would be hard put to argue that the Bliss farm did not see the most significant action during the battle. And to circle back around to my original question, which end of the line is it closer to? The Union line or the Confederate line? Let's just call it midway. All right? And so it's what? Say it again, sir.
No man's land.
It's no man's land. And so guess what? these Johnnies, you know, these old perky old Johnnies, they come out here and they get in this barn. And I don't know if you've ever had fleas on a cat, but you have about the same type reaction with trying to get these Rebs out of here. They're going to climb up in the top of this house, and they're going to climb up in the top of this barn. And what's the house made out of?
Wood.
Wood and the side. Say it again. Stone. And will bullets go through stone?
No.
Will bullets go through thick wood? No. So they basically have a fort. And they get inside here. Now, somebody will have to gauge the range for me. But they start making life very unpleasant for the Union soldiers up there on Cemetery Ridge. In particular, they're sniping at probably anybody waving a big flag or looks like a big officer. But more importantly, they're shooting the artillerists as they're starting to shell them out here. And so what does the Union do? The Union sends out troops to run the Rebs off. And they're successful in that. So, in no certain order, we have out here at some point the 14th Connecticut, who mounted or who had at the time of the battle 172 men. The 12th New Jersey, 444 men. The 1st Delaware, 251 men. And all three of those units are going to be coming back and forth. If you look around the Bliss Farm site today, you will see monuments to all three of those units that are out here. That's the reason they're out here, because the Union comes out and establishes their position. All right, so here's the Bliss Farm action in double time. Elements of the 111th and the 125th New York and the 1st Delaware first established skirmish lines in front. If I had to guess, it would either be that, not this fence in front of you, but either the second one or probably more likely that more distant one. Not the one by the highway, but the one in between. So 1, 2, 3, the third one, which you see off in the distance. That would look about like skirmish, the original skirmish line. Why do I say that? Because you got to allow room for the Rebs to come in here and take over the barn and the house. So they couldn't be right here, right? So they'd be right over there. Okay, so they're on the skirmish lines throughout the late morning and early afternoon of July 2nd. 39th New York was sent as far as the Bliss Farm, which Alexander Hayes, we'll be talking a little bit about him later, but he's over here at the headquarters up on Cemetery Ridge, and he referred to the Bliss Farm, and this is never good for your abode, if a general refers to your house as, quote, that damn White House over there. And if you know Hayes, that quote was probably watered down. Now, opposing them initially is going to be Scales, North Carolinians, at early dawn on July 2nd until relieved by Anderson's division around 1 o'clock. Now, here we go. Here we get into the action and eventually what happens to these buildings. Posey sends forward the 16th and 19th Mississippi. From Anderson's division, Posey's brigade, he sends forward 2 of his regiments. I've got a good friend down in Williamsburg, Virginia. That's all she does is study Posey's brigade right here, and I have to have a shout out to 16th and 19th Mississippi. At the height of the skirmishing, Posey added the 48th Mississippi, which meant approximately, look at where you are, 1,000 Confederate soldiers are strung out across this field. 1,000 Confederate soldiers, opposed to what? That skirmish line right there. All right, so what do the Yankees do? By mid-afternoon, Company I of the 12th New Jersey, 1st Delaware were on the fence line near the Bliss Farm as Longstreet started to hammer the left. They could obviously hear it. Posey put his men in and sought control of the Bliss Farm site. In other words, Posey decided he wasn't going to give, and they could send over here whatever they needed to do, and he wasn't going to give. All right, now this is cool. I set up all that action. I promised you at the beginning this wasn't going to be a battle walk. Ha ha! Now Dan, Ranger Dan over here from Eisenhower National Historic Site is sitting over here saying he started a battle walk. Ha ha! I'm about to circle it back around to the actual physical structure itself. And that's how I justify everything that I just told you. It's not a battle walk. All right, they sent out, these Union boys sent out a contingent to take the house. and Lieutenant Brady found Colonel Edward Harris in the basement of the barn. He found the lieutenant colonel in the basement of the barn, quote, whereupon he, Harris, after carefully coming out from his safe retreat and taking a hasty glance over the situation, turned and fled, I hope I can do this, precipitously toward our main line. In other words, he went that way, leaving that portion of the field in the immediate charge of Tanner and myself, Brady and Tanner. So they got 2 lieutenants out here running the whole regiment. Quote, looking around, I saw the men of the 1st Delaware running to the rear, recalled Sergeant Henry Bowen of the 12th New Jersey. Soon catching up with Lieutenant Colonel Harris, who was getting to the rear as fast as he could. Now this had to happen right out here in this field. He swung his sword around and called me a hard name, telling me to go back. This I did not do, but made a detour around him and got across in record time. I love honesty. I do. I would do the same thing. He'd have a hard, you could hit me. I used to average about 2 or 3 paddlings a year. All right, he's gonna have to hit me harder than that dang sword to get my attention. Harris soon came across Hancock himself. I'm not talking about Hancock's aide, but Harris couldn't have planned this any worse, because by the time he gets back to the Union line, Winfield Scott Hancock is standing there, and he's seen the whole thing. And Hancock is the whole commander of the United States 2nd Corps. And if you know anything about Winfield Scott Hancock, my friend, oh Lord, especially in combat situations, it's no good place for decent people to be around Winfield Scott Hancock. So what's Hancock doing? And no, he doesn't stand him up and have him shot on the spot. But what does he do to him?
Tells him to go back.
Well, no, he didn't give him that chance. What does he do to him? He arrested him. They didn't literally cuff him, but he has him placed under arrest, and that's the last you'll ever see of him on a battlefield. Now, the Confederates now held the Bliss farm. Now, 4 companies of the 12th New Jersey were tasked with taking the farm back. So here they come. Picture it, ladies and gentlemen. You can do this. I can talk to them blue in the face. But picture yourself a blue line coming off Cemetery Ridge. It would not have been a battle line. They would have been spaced, I don't know, maybe let's say like 10 paces apart. And here they come waving down through here. Well, the rebels can obviously see them coming. And so what do they do in this farm, in this barn?
Get ready.
They redouble their efforts and they start picking them off. Now, as we go over the field, you'll be able to see what kind of cover they had and what kind of cover they did not have. But it'd be hard to get out here. Okay, they succeeded in getting here, the 12th New Jersey, and they took some prisoners, but the advance of Wright's Georgians, which went across the field and ended up at the copse of trees over here, and the 12th Mississippi, the only regiment that Posey had not deployed on this field, made them hastily retreat. In other words, the Confederates of Wright's Georgians outflanked them, and they couldn't stay in this position at the Bliss farm while they were being retreated over there. All right, so now the rebels have got it again. 12th Mississippi takes position here at the Bliss. This is on July 3rd. 5 companies of the 12th New Jersey go forward to suppress the CSA fire on Cemetery Ridge, only to find the Rebs withdrew to a nearby orchard. Well, guess where the orchard is? Right over here. See, that gave me the opportunity, see what I'm doing here? To point out the orchard. But you've been in that area. Now here we get to the crux of the matter. 4 companies of the 14th Connecticut joined the New Jerseyans. Now Hayes, the general over there who curses a lot, and the brigade commander, Thomas Smith, or Smythe, however you want to say it, S-M-Y-T-H, were tired of this endless action. Both authorized that the buildings be burned. Lieutenant Frederick Seymour of Company I of the 14th Connecticut was ordered to deliver the message to burn the barn. He never made it. They shot him before he got here, and he could deliver the order. Simultaneously, General Hayes sent Sergeant Charles Hitchcock of the 111th New York with orders also. Another version has Charles Postle of Smith's or Smythe's brigade staff being sent with the order via horseback. And if you ever get a chance, if we ever do a battle walk, I'm not going to, it's a great account, but basically Postle gets on his horse over there and gallops as hard as he can, zigzagging across the field, and you could see the dirt, you know, kicking up around him from what? Horses' hooves and what else? Bullets, because those Rebs are shooting at him as he's coming out through here. He made it all the way here, and this is what I love about historical sites, but we're at Gettysburg, the place that I work and the place that I love. Postle pulls up right here. And when he gets to the barn, ladies and gentlemen, of course the Yankees have retaken the darn thing, he gives the orders. Well, he can catch his breath here. Why can he catch his breath? Because what is the barn doing for him once he gets here? That's right, he's protecting him. He's providing a shield for Postle. And he delivers the orders, or whoever delivers the orders, and he gallops back. When he gets, I got to tell this part. I shouldn't tell this part, but I got to tell this part. Now, Dan needs to know that right now I am taking liberties with the whole narrative right here. He got almost back to the Union line, and Postle, who probably had a lot more hair than me, is going to turn around and pull his hat off, and he's going to doff it to the Confederates. You know what the Confederates are going to do to him?
Shoot him.
They're going to, no, my God, there's fucking people over here. Ooh, I'd hate to come home late on YouTube. Lord have mercy. Shoot them, huh? Well, no use in asking questions, is there? Just blast them out the front door right there. That'll do it. Level, just pull both triggers. Wait for the smoke to clear. See if you hit anything out there. He turned around, he doffed his hat, and the rebels cheered him.
Yeah, we're making it back.
Isn't that so cool? That's just the coolest thing, you know? It's just, I don't know, it's just cool. Or at least I think it's cool. All right, so how did they light it? What do the Union soldiers have a lot of on them?
Powder.
Powder. And what does powder do when you strike a match to it?
Goes up.
Right, so what they do, they took those paper cartridges out, they ripped the paper cartridges out, and they spread the powder all over the floor or in the corners. Then they went to the barn, which was right here. You can picture it. They walked through the door of the barn, and they started gathering up what?
Straw.
Straw and hay. And what did they start doing with it? They took it all the way over to the house, and they put it in the corners of the barn. They poured powder over it, and they struck a match. And this thing, this barn, which had been here for several decades, with that dry wood, did what? Went right on up on the morning of July 3rd. Right here. Okay, so he has a pile of smoking debris. What do?
File a claim.
You,
Don't get paid, but you file a claim.
that's right, yes sir, he does.
We could try to file a claim.
He's a learned man. I like that. Nicholas Cadori. Does anybody know where the Cadori farm is? Right over there, everybody point to it, right over here. Nicholas Cadori is going to purchase this farm in 1865. Now remember, I told you that he paid $1,960.73. What would you consider his farm worth now?
A little less.
A little less. $1,000 is what he sold for. Bliss moved back to New York. I would too. William Bliss died in 1888 and Adeline died in 1889. And if you wish to find them, they are buried in Sinclairsville, New York. I guess what they still consider their hometown. Now, going to your point here.
That's not where they moved back to. They moved to Jamestown now, from here.
Is that close?
Sinclairsville's like 40 miles east of Jamestown.
Same thing. William Bliss files a claim. You sure about that? William Bliss files a claim. Welcome to video. You can't take it back now.
It's in the Bliss book.
William Bliss files a claim of $1,700 for the house and barn, $240 for the fencing, $60 for the hay and grain, and $1,256 for the personal property. The state paid him, the state of Pennsylvania paid him $3,216.48 on November 3rd of 1871. So he sold the farm for $1,000, and he got another $3,200 as what, roughly 8 years later. Now think about this, trying to inventory everything from memory. Think about if your house burned down, folks, and the insurance company said, well, what'd you have in it? And you start trying to list all this. When you get into the damage claims, Dan has looked at these too. When you get into the damage claims, I mean, they're into minute detail. You know, I've seen some of them estimate how many board feet of rails that they've left there, which I think maybe some of them took a little liberty. And here's something interesting. The U.S. government refused to pay, never paid, citing a Supreme Court decision of 1902 stating the federal government was not responsible for the destruction of private property during actual combat situations. Yeah, crazy. All right, we're going to take a few steps on the other side of this mound, and I'm going to have one more stop for the Bliss farm. Let's walk right over here.
Wheels and basics.
Now what you see right here, ladies and gentlemen, is a cornerstone. And if you got, it's hot enough out here, and we got a few more stops. This is the longest stop I have today, so I'm expending a lot of energy on it. On November 29th of 1884, Simon Kadori, remember he bought this site, the old Bliss Farm site, received, quote, a deed of transfer of the plot of ground from Simon Kadori to Henry Stevens, acting for the 14th Connecticut Volunteer Reunion Association Monument Committee. That's all one title. States that the area purchased was 81 square feet. So if you go from here, you'll see another one somewhere over there, which I can't see. And if you walked on the other side of the house, you would find two more markers. As the monument states, the big monument, I should say, the stone stands, the bigger stone stands at the center of the Bliss Farm. That marker's going to be right around the corner right there on the other side, while another stands at the center of the Bliss house. But instead of, I'm pointing this out to you because we're talking about historiography and the layers of the land and things that are no longer here. Usually these are used for what on Gettysburg Battlefield? Flank markers. Here they're used as property lines to draw out the 81 square feet. Interestingly, Fred Tilburg, who most of you have never heard of, I probably should take the opportunity, because I'll never have another opportunity to talk about Fred Tilburg. He was the historian here for many decades, especially research historian during the 1960s and 1970s. And Tilburg, I believe, wrote, Dan can correct me if I'm wrong, he wrote the one of the early National Park Service tour booklets, you know, that you would find in your grandparents' drawer when they went and so forth. He did that. In Gettysburg Military Park lore, though, Fred Tilburg was working on the definitive account of the Gettysburg campaign. But he lost steam when another book by a gentleman named Edwin Coddington was published. And Fred Tilburg never finished that. However, interestingly, Fred Tilburg noted in 1939 that only 3 markers remained. Tilburg recommended that a new 4th cornerstone be cut and installed. Now the question to me, which I could not ascertain, is which stone was replaced. But there are 4 out here today. All right. All right, any questions so far? All right, let's walk right over here so we can see something. One more peg, yeah. I'm just letting y'all get a look at that if you haven't so far. This is a 12th New Jersey.
Hey Matt, did it say how much I paid for 81 square feet?
No, shouldn't have been much though. I wouldn't think. How do I look with the shade?
Good.
What do you think? I apologize to y'all too, because I usually have what I call my hell week with these allergies in April, but this weather, man, has pushed it to May. And I'm out here, man. I got so much Coca-Cola in me and antihistamines in me right now, so I'm wiping my eyes. I can't even breathe. Talking about the first Delaware marker, Tilburg noted, in the absence of definite information pertaining to the former location of the horizontal stone marker of the 1st Delaware Regiment, it has been determined to erect this marker in a position marked on the ground just northwest of the old cellar, or at the approximate position of the northwest corner of the house. The marker should face west and should extend about 10 inches above the surface of the ground. Now, I do not know if that was, I did not know this was a replacement. Now Bliss, to finish this up, William Bliss was once asked after the war how he felt about the loss of his farm. And he said, quote, "Let it go. I would give 20 farms for such a victory." Now I might add, before you start waving flags over there, all right, and humming the battle hymn of the Republic, with equal fervor, if you ever watched the outlaw Josie Wells, a man must be able to sing Dixie and the battle hymn of the Republic with equal. When Bliss said that, he had already gotten his check. Any questions before we move on?
Was he a successful farmer with the farm that he had here?
Not after his compatriots got here. I would call it kind of unsuccessful, actually. I mean, these Yankees know how to burn something now, and they came up here and lit him up. But you know, I didn't say this part when they were dispatched. When they were discussing burning this place, the theory was that the fire would make the stone so hot that even if it burned down, the rebels would be unable to occupy it from the heat that was inside of it.
Why did they try shelling it with artillery?
Well, funny you would mention that, because in one, I believe, I didn't mark this down, but I believe it was in the Connecticut reunion. Anyway, one of the Union soldiers' notes, here it is, it was in one of the Union soldiers' notes that they were at one of the reunions here, and there was a Confederate veteran. I could look it up. It named the battery, but it was right over there in that tree line, and the Union veterans were standing here talking about burning this farm, and this Confederate came up and says, "You didn't burn it, we burned it." And they go, "How do you mean?" He goes, "I was ordered to have, I believe it was like 10 shells for every gun, And he went on to say, I piled them up by the wheel, and we fired all 10 of those shells from each gun into these two sites. And so he felt that he lit it on fire, or his battery lit it on fire, I should say, right there. So I don't know. They tried. I would also add, since we're on it, since you brought that up, and I'm getting way deep in the weeds with y'all right now, but AP Hill's artillery opens up at around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning of July 3rd. And they shoot up a lot of ammunition. They shoot for about 10 or 15 minutes roughly. And I don't know if they open up because they think Pickett's charge is supposed to take place that early, or they're shelling the Bliss farm. I don't know. But they do open, I can tell you that. I'm sure a lot of them hit it. Any others?
Matt, do you know if there were any period pictures of the farmhouse, this house?
There is no pictures. And I don't even know if you'd say this was accurate, but 12th New Jersey has a bronze relief right up here. It's the only depiction of that. I've got the right monument on the 12th New Jersey. It's the only depiction of the Bliss farm that we have, and I'm sure that was a lot of artistic license. One Union soldier said in describing the Bliss farm, he compared it to other Pennsylvania farms, and I've never thought of it this way, but even Union soldiers, when they came into this German influenced land of Adams County, Pennsylvania, the Union soldier noted that the farmers seemed to take more pride in their barn than they did their house. You know, and a lot of people didn't understand that from different portions of the North. Any others? How's he doing? Pretty hot, isn't it? So you want to be a park ranger. How'd the tour go? All right, Dan's gonna lead the tour forward. He's got to stop in between here and the road. And so we'll follow Ranger Dan and we'll circle around the fences. Go ahead.
So real quick before we move, two things I want to point out. Off in that direction, everybody look off here to your slightly northwest. See the brick structure with the triangle point on it. Everybody see that? Everybody know what that is? The armory. The armory building, yes. While we're out here talking about historic structures that no longer exist, that's one that does exist. Built in 1938 by the Public Works Administration. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on when we talk about the German POW camp, because that was used during that time, during World War II. It was actually, prior to that, used, let me make sure I get it right, built in 1938 and housed Company E of the 103rd Quartermaster Regiment for the Pennsylvania National Guard, which went into service and served overseas with the 28th Infantry Division. While these guys are serving overseas, in 1944, there are German POWs using their former home here in Gettysburg as housing. Other thing I'll note is a transition to our next topic. You asked about historic photographs of the Bliss farm at the time of the battle. This is not the Bliss farm during the time of the Civil War battle. Well, this is the Bliss farm during the time of our next stop. How's that for a transition? Yeah.
I can't beat that,
See, Matt,
Dan.
a transition is what you use, but not. It's the Bliss farm during what we're going to talk about at our next stop, Camp Colt. These are FT-17 French Renault tanks here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So
You understand that picture's taken right here.
yeah,
What he's
this
showing.
is the bank of the barn the tanks are driving over. So we're going to head up in this direction, follow the fence. If the water truck is there, we're just going to go straight up towards the water truck and we'll do our Camp Colt stop there. Sound good? Yep. All right.
We're only doing a little round top when we start the rehab.
Oh, it's going to be a year and a half, 2 year project. Yeah. Redoing all the paths up there, redoing the parking area.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to jump forward now from 1863, from the Civil War to the Great War. It was not unprecedented at this time for battlefields for national military parks to be used by the military. Spanish-American War, Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park had been used as a training grounds then. But 1917, the United States found itself involved in the First World War, the Great War at the time. The standing army was only 200,000. So if they're going to build up forces, they need to do so quickly, and they need to have space to do so. Being that these parks, like Gettysburg, were managed by the War Department at that time, they're ideal for that. So a lot of folks are familiar with Camp Colt. How many folks have heard about the camp that came before it? All right. So in 1917, there was actually a camp here. It didn't have a fancy name like Camp Colt. It was called simply the Army Camp at Gettysburg. So it didn't have the catchy name. But troops began arriving here in June of 1917. That's the same month that the Virginia Memorial right there is being dedicated. And they built structures here on these fields for troops to be barracked. They had a water system dug below the frost line here, extending the sewage system and the water system from the borough of Gettysburg. And they actually dug up quite a few Confederate remains when they were doing that, as you can imagine with what these fields saw in July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. There were 2 regular U.S. regiments, the 4th and the 7th U.S. Infantry, that were here, and they were helping to train and fill the ranks of 4 new regiments, the 58th, 59th, 60th, and 61st United States Infantry. Overall, the training here, again, is preparing these guys for combat, for warfare in France. At this time, the United States Army very green. By November of 1917, a lot of these troops were sent out of Gettysburg and headed towards France. Fast forward a couple months now to March of 1918. Young Captain Dwight David Eisenhower, 27 years old. He is ready and eager to go to France to take part in combat. As a young Army officer, this is his opportunity. This is the Great War. It's not like there's going to be another one of these 20 years later. This is your chance to become an officer. Nobody thought that 20 years later Ike would be in the position that he was. But instead of being sent to France, he's sent here to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He was not happy about it. He saw this as his missed opportunity. He would write years later, "My mood was black." He envisioned a scenario years later where he was sitting around at a reunion with other members of his West Point class, and they were reminiscing about combat, and he could only reminisce about a training assignment. But what he was sent here to do was to prepare soldiers for tank warfare. It's a brand new thing. This is the birthplace of the United States Tank Corps. He didn't know what he was doing quite. He had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. In fact, he said years later, "Now I really began to learn about responsibility." He said this, quote, "Most of our work was improvisation. At first hand, every day I had practical lessons in the Republic's lack of preparedness for war." Now, when he initially gets here, he finds they're using the old 1917 camp barracks here. And this is a visual of what the camp looked like. We'll look at this again once we're up on the hillside there. But this is looking from Cemetery Hill out towards these fields in 1917. This is what that camp looked like. So this is what Ike is inheriting. Now when he gets here in April of 1918, it's hard to imagine today, but a snowstorm hits. And his priority is keeping his men warm. So he goes in the town of Gettysburg and he finds as many wood stoves as he can find, brings them into the camp to try to keep his guys warm during this blizzard. And that speaks to a larger issue that they had, an overall lack of supplies here. It's a tank training camp, but they don't have any tanks to train with. So what do? Well, if you're Eisenhower, you focus on discipline and military order. You teach soldiers how to drill. You teach them what Army life is like. You teach them how to fix things. There's a mechanics school in the camp. You teach them Morse code, all useful skills you can train on even if you don't have tanks to train with. But what about the tank component? Well, you get flatbed trucks, you put big guns on them, and you drive them over by Big Round Top and you start shooting. As a way to train these soldiers on how to maneuver and aim at targets. He focused on discipline. He said this, quote, "I began to look around for ways to instruct the men in skills that would be valuable in combat and prevent the dry rot of tedious idleness." Now by June of 1918, things started looking up for Eisenhower. They got 3 F-17 Renault tanks, which he parked at the edge of the camp up here towards the town because the locals were very curious. About 10,000 men were here in June of 1918. And to give you a sense on the imprint of this camp, it was massive. It stretched from the town where the Gettysburg Hospital is, a few blocks in that direction, all the way down towards the peach orchard. So we are in the very middle of what was Camp Colt. You see where Pickett's Buffet is, with the KFC and the McDonald's just on the other side. That's where the camp headquarters was. At the angle up here, just across from the tree, we'll talk about it. We'll go past it here on our way towards our next stop. Here, the camp headquarters, the camp hospital, was located just along Long Lane and Emmitsburg Road. We're standing right about where the camp bakery was. The camp hospital had operating rooms, waiting rooms, all sorts of stuff. It was very, very advanced structures here on the Gettysburg Battlefield. Overall, the camp had 90 vehicles, 48 motorcycles, fitting as they keep driving past us here. One thing of particular note that I want to point out, especially for my friend Ranger Matt, who's not paying attention. The camp had a baseball team. This is the Camp Colt baseball team. I don't know what their record was. Better than the Orioles. But there was a swimming pool over behind the Kadori farm over here. There's a parade grounds, athletic grounds. They had boxing matches. They had a camp newspaper, all in the very middle of the Gettysburg Battlefield. So it's quite an advanced operation here. Eisenhower had a lot of challenges to deal with. Training soldiers, working without supplies. Biggest challenge, dealing with the Spanish influenza pandemic. Soldiers arrived from Camp Devens, Massachusetts in September of 1918. Turns out they already had the Spanish flu when they arrived. Eisenhower focused on getting the ill to the camp hospital, quarantining the ill, focused on hygiene in the camp, making sure that soldiers were separated, they had fresh air in their tents and their barracks. A lot of these measures were not popular, but they were effective at the time. The camp had about 175 soldiers die from the Spanish influenza in the span of 2 months, September and October of 1918. Now, October of 1918, I should note they also used the St. Francis Xavier's Church on High Street as a hospital at the time as well. By October of 1918, Eisenhower was promoted. Began to look like he was going to finally get his chance to go over to France. But of course, November of 1918, the armistice comes and combat comes to a close. So the camp ends without Eisenhower having had a chance to get into combat during World War I, just as it looked like he might be sent overseas. But these fields were an inspiration to him at a difficult time. He drew from the lessons of the past to train soldiers for the present difficulty. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later once we get up in the shade on Cemetery Hill. How's that sound? All right. So we're going to head down this fence line here. Folks want to follow us? So now that we're in the shade, let's wrap up Camp Colt a little bit. Also, now that I'm not competing against cars and motorcycles.
Any questions?
Again,
Anybody know who won the battle?
we're in a little bit better vantage spot. But again, this is that 1917 camp photo. And you're looking from roughly the same angle here. So this is what it looked like at the time. It always amazes me that they built all this here on the landscape. You know, such a different preservation philosophy from what we would have today. And we're going to talk about that again here in just another minute. But I think the most impressive thing to me about Camp Colt was it's one of these instances where, you know, sometimes the thing you don't want ends up being the best thing for you. We all have instances like that in our own lives. But in those situations, you can learn from difficulties and setbacks and grow from them. And that's really what Eisenhower did here. A lot of these lessons that he learned at Camp Colt, he did apply later on in his military career. Eisenhower's success was never built on being a combat commander. It was always built on getting people to work together even in difficult situations. Not once in his entire career did Eisenhower ever lead men in combat, which is amazing for someone who served that long and had that type of stature. But it was always administration, organization, planning, and cooperation. And those are all the same skills that he built his political career on. And he helped to foster a lot of that here at Camp Colt in Gettysburg in 1918. And one of the...
Before you move on from that, I've always wondered that. Can you describe to the crowd his personality? What made Ike win?
His personality?
Well, I mean, he had something about him that made him click in the role that you just said. I've always been curious about that.
I think he had that quality of simply being able to get along with anybody. You know, even when you think about, like, you know, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, right? Prickly personality, difficult to get along with. Other Allied commanders didn't necessarily like him. You know, not only did he and Eisenhower not get along at times, Ike even hosted him at his farm here in Gettysburg. There's stories in the 1944 as the Allies are moving through Western Europe. Monty's yelling at Eisenhower and waving papers in his face and getting mad at him, and Ike just calmly lets him finish and then says, "Monty, I'm your boss. You can't talk to me like that." So he had that ability to get along with people and get people to work together. And his quote on leadership, and I'm not getting it exactly right, it's a paraphrase, but it's getting people to do something because you can, even if they don't want to do it. Getting people to do something because they know it needs to be done, even if it's difficulties involved. Again, I'm not getting the exact words right, but it's that ability to get people to work together.
So he's slow to anger.
Slow to anger.
There's a tick on your pocket. There's that's the freshman.
Nope. It's a spider.
Spider. Okay. Looks like a tick.
He's slow to anger. Another story about his personality. This one's directly from Susan. That's right. I'm name dropping Susan. Susan Eisenhower does visit and brings groups to the site from time to time, and she tells a story about the stable doors being left open and the horses getting out and stampeding across the putting green. And she was terrified that she was going to get in trouble for this. And Ike was simply sitting there laughing. And he said he hadn't seen horses run like that since he was a boy in Kansas. And he put his arm around her and said, "Don't worry, it's just a putting green. It's just an accident." So he definitely did have a temper, but he was still slow to anger and very understanding. So I would say, to your question, that describes his personality. But there's a quote I love about this, about Ike and Camp Colt. It's from a veteran of the camp. Veteran Walter Hard wrote this about Eisenhower, that he had, quote, "integrity and genius tempered with compassion." So that also, I think, describes his personality. And veteran Walter Hard said this, quote, "I liked Ike 34 years before those I like Ike buttons appeared." So, and I'll add this to kind of wrap up the Camp Colt story. Camp Colt is one of the few places. The whole battlefield, of course, is a living monument to those who fought here and served here. But Ike and Camp Colt has its own living memorial right there, that pine tree. Every day people drive past that pine tree and don't realize that is actually a monument, a memorial to the men of Camp Colt. It was planted there when Eisenhower was President of the United States in August of 1954, August 28th of 1954. There was a ceremony where it was planted with soil from all 48 states and territories. So they included 50 pounds of earth taken from other places and planted around the tree. So talking about things the National Park Service would never do today is taking soil from 50 different states and putting it on the battlefield. And this is the quote from the Gettysburg Times. 50 pounds of earth taken from 48 states, Hawaii and Alaska, will be scattered around the roots of the pine tree. Earth steeped in the blood of American soldiers from the Revolution through the great wars of our republic. Because they took this soil from famous historic sites from every state in the country. So for example, South Carolina sent soil from the Kings Mountain battlefield, the American victory in 1780 in the Revolution. Texas sent soil from, any guesses? The Alamo. Louisiana sent soil from the Chalmette battlefield. North Dakota sent earth from Fort Lincoln. Massachusetts sent soil from the home of General George S. Patton. Colorado sent soil from the home of Mamie's mother in Denver, Mamie Eisenhower's mother. Nome, Alaska contributed a pound of soil. Kentucky sent soil from Fort Knox. So from all over the country, they're including soil with this. So the tree itself is a living memorial for Eisenhower, planted in 1954. And there's a little plaque there that actually has a typo mentioning when Eisenhower was inaugurated. It says he was inaugurated January 2nd of 1953 instead of January 20th of 1953. So that's another little bit of park trivia there for you. So Eisenhower, definitely Camp Colt, these men who lived here had a formative experience. The 1917 camp, when Ike is here, the guys who had trained here are over in France fighting in combat. Some of them killed in combat during the Great War. Eisenhower's time here on this battlefield is shaping him. And when Eisenhower's in Europe, in World War II in 1944, this battlefield is being used for another purpose altogether. Since we're in the shade here, we're not going to walk to another stop. We're just going to talk about it here now. It's a little bit of a rough transition, but I think it'll work. So if we look over here, just past that Eisenhower tree, the Camp Colt tree, you can see there's a monument right over here along the Emmitsburg Road. That's the 8th Ohio Monument. Everybody see that? So the road stretching down from there is called Long Lane. The fields just on the other side here in 1944 had hundreds of German soldiers, German prisoners of war, when Gettysburg was home to a POW camp. And this is a hand-drawn sketch of it. You can see here in the corner the Home Sweet Home Motel. That's right about where the 8th Ohio Monument is. Long Lane would be here. The camp is about 400 feet in this direction, 600 feet in that direction. So why is there a German POW camp here in Gettysburg in 1944? Well, a lot like the same reason there was a tank training camp here in 1918, because the United States was at war and we didn't know what to do. We needed space. So in the fall of 1942, the United States government announced that Axis power prisoners of war would be brought to prisoner of war camps in the United States. Ultimately, there were over 500 of these camps in the U.S. during World War II. And Gettysburg was an ideal location. It had already been used as a training grounds during World War I. There was a CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps camp set up at McMillan Woods back on Seminary Ridge. We haven't even really gotten into that today. So they have some structures there left over still. So it's an ideal location for this. So in spring of 1944, 50 prisoners from Fort Meade, Maryland are sent here to Gettysburg. They're housed in that armory building we saw while they construct this camp right out here. June 2nd, 1944, the rest of them arrive. Over 400 prisoners of war. Most of these were German soldiers from the African Corps that were captured in 1942 and 1943. A lot of them, especially spring of 1943. The German surrender in May of 43 had 250,000 German soldiers surrendering to Allied forces in North Africa. This camp was staffed by 60 enlisted men and 5 officers as guards. It was commanded by Captain Lawrence Thomas, who had been a local school superintendent and could speak German. He's an ideal choice. He's actually buried up in Evergreen Cemetery. Now, what, you might ask, are these Germans going to be doing in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? Are they going on Ranger Matt's battle walks? Probably not. The United States government used them as labor. If locals could not be found to do jobs, the jobs priority went to locals first, so that the local citizens could still have some economic benefit from work in the area. But if they needed extra labor to perform tasks here in Gettysburg on the home front, hundreds of prisoners of war are used for that. So they were used from everything from this, from harvesting crops at farms and orchards, staffing canning plants, cutting lumber, working in the local quarry and the local fertilizer plant, and helping with other odd jobs around the county. They worked everywhere from Littlestown to Biglerville to Hanover to Chambersburg to Emmitsburg. Now they were paid $1 an hour, 90 cents of which went back to the United States government. The other 10 cents that they got to keep, they could use as coupons in the camp store. The U.S. government made $138,000 in profit from these POWs just in 1944.
You mean all of them, not just
I'm sorry?
all of them? All five?
Just
Okay.
The camp.
Oh, wow.
The
Just
camp
from this
here.
camp.
This camp here, correct, yeah. From the Gettysburg camp. And as the Gettysburg Times reported, use of German prisoners of war in Adams County's canneries and orchards during the last 2 years allowed the production of thousands of dollars worth of food that otherwise would not have been processed. It reported that in 1946. Some of the prisoners of war actually told sources that they had, quote, purposefully surrendered to the Americans to get a chance to see the United States and be safe from the battlefield. Now in 1944 and 1945, when these POWs are here in Gettysburg, there is some local pushback. Because when Allied forces start liberating prisoner of war camps, when they start coming upon concentration camps, and then they see how individuals are being treated by Nazi Germany, and then they see how German soldiers are being treated here in Gettysburg, there's a big difference there. So there was some local pushback from that. That locals were complaining, as the Gettysburg Times noted, that the German POWs were, quote, well-fed and living the good life while brave Americans were neglected and starving, these feelings were exacerbated by Nazi atrocities as they became known towards the war's end. Some of the locals were wary of the German POWs. Some were friendly with them. Some of the local companies refused to have anything to do with them. They didn't want these individuals working at their property. Now it's fitting that we're talking about this right here, because July 5th of 1944, there was an escape. So had we walked our original route, right about across from the tree there, right under the road, there's a drainage ditch that's still there today. It was there in 1944. Well, 2 of these German POWs escaped through that drainage ditch, and they headed right here to the high water mark. They made their way here, then they went south along the Emmitsburg Road. They were captured July 11th in a farmhouse outside of York. And nobody has any idea how they got to York, because they were still wearing their POW uniforms when they were captured, and they didn't speak any English. And that's a long way to walk and a long way to go if you don't speak any English and you're wearing a prisoner of war uniform. There were a couple deaths in the camp. One of them was a local German, German POW who committed suicide working in a local apple orchard. And in September of 1945, there was a likely accidental discharge of his rifle, and one of the guards was killed in one of the guard towers right along the Emmitsburg Road there. They had 4 towers at each of the corners of the camp there. That winter of 1944, after several months, most of the POWs were shipped elsewhere. Those who were still here were sent to the structures at the old CCC camp in McMillan Woods, which is now a Boy Scout camp at the park. But this POW camp continued on through 1945 into early 1946, when the remaining POWs were sent back to Germany. And I'll wrap this up with a quote from Karl Brandt, who was captured at Tunisia. And I think this kind of brings it full circle here. These guys were captured by Allied forces commanded by Dwight David Eisenhower, who years before had trained soldiers on these same fields. And after they were captured by Ike, where were they sent? To Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where Ike had trained and where Ike would one day buy a farm just on the other side of those trees here in Gettysburg. But Karl Brandt, one of these German POWs, told the Gettysburg Times this July 16th of 2001. He came back and was visiting Gettysburg. I had an experience in what I learned in life at the POW camp during this time. And what I learned in life was a lot during this time. I would not give back one little thing. So some of these German POWs actually had a pretty good experience here on the Gettysburg Battlefield. But I do think that does help to put it in context. The lessons that Eisenhower learned here at Camp Colt, using those same lessons as he's overseeing Operation Torch 80 years ago in the Allied invasion into North Africa, the fighting in the North African campaign. And if I can transition for just a moment and do a plug, because I've been asked this several times by people as we've been walking about what the Eisenhower site has going on. Along these lines of North Africa and 80 years ago, we are bringing back our World War II weekend this year, September, 3rd weekend in September. And it's going to happen, I believe it's the 17th and 18th this year, and our theme is 1942. So if you want to come out and see living history units talking about that North African campaign, talking about Guadalcanal, talking about stateside training in 1942, come on out and visit us this September, 3rd weekend in September for our World War II weekend. So we have a lot of other great stuff going on at the site as well. Next Friday, May 27th, we're resuming shuttles to the site, resuming regular tours of the Eisenhower home. So got a lot of great programs. Follow us on Facebook, check out our website, a lot of great stuff. So Matt, you have anything you want to add here?
Let's get it away.
All your
Any rights? I mean,
World War II stuff. Check your firearms.
what about this up there?
So,
Any questions?
any questions for me?
Was this
Dan.
Yeah, there was also a Camp Michelle up at Pine Grove Furnace. That was a little bit bigger. There were German and Japanese forces there, and that was more of an interrogation site.
Were there barracks out there with that camp? What actually
The camp itself was mostly tents.
It was tents.
Yeah, mostly tents.
Wow.
Yeah, with guard towers.
Pretty cold in the
park
winter.
is no longer a War Department park then?
Then it was National Park Service.
Right.
Yeah.
36 or something like that?
I'm sorry?
In 36?
33.
33.
Yeah. I will add, going back to Camp Colt along those lines, when it's War Department, you know, it's being run by the Gettysburg Commissioners, and Ike has this big tank training camp in the middle, so they're trying to administer a War Department National Military Park that also has a U.S. Army presence in it. And there's conflicts there in authority, because Nicholson, the head commissioner there, he kept ticketing the Camp Colt soldiers for going too fast through the park. Yeah. So their duty, if you got caught going too fast, if you got in trouble, you got too many infractions, you had to work on redoing the Emmitsburg Road here.
Did I suggest this location for one of these camps?
He did not. He was not involved in that process. So.
Do you know anything about, to speak of, about which never happened, the plan, I don't know what they call it, where the park was potentially donating metal to the war drive?
Yeah.
You know anything about that?
1942, the park had a plan to donate metal sculptures and objects as scrap metal for the war effort. And they had a phased approach to this. They did take some things, some small little cannonball pyramids, things like that here and there, a couple signs here and there. No major monuments or items, they didn't take any scrap metal from them, but they did have a plan for this. And I don't remember what each stage of it was, but I remember the last ones they were going to keep, the ones that they deemed to be the highest value for the monuments. And I don't know if this is why you asked the question, but you'll like the info.
Okay.
There were 3 monuments that they decided that if it came down to it, these were the last 3 they were going to get rid of. Any guesses? Hi, Watermark.
Lee?
Lee? The Virginia Memorial is one of them. North Carolina Memorial, Alabama. What do those 3 have in common? In 1942, they're the only 3 Confederate state monuments in this battlefield park. Everything else is federal. There's 2nd Maryland up on Colts Hill, but those are the 3 big Confederate state memorials here at Gettysburg, and those were the 3 they were going to keep. So they were going to melt down the victor of Gettysburg before they were going to melt down Robert E. Lee, which I think says something very profound about the nation's memory of memory of the Civil War during the Second World War. Well, it says a lot about, I don't remember who the superintendent was at one time. Yeah. But I mean, through the years, the management of the park has influenced which monuments were placed, things like that. So, yeah. So,
I didn't know that.
What about like burials, mass burials? Did they find a lot in those years?
well, they found some when they were digging the water lines for the 1917 camp.
Yeah. How about
I don't know of instances of them coming across graves during Camp Colt. I don't know. I haven't read that. Yeah. I will say there are soldiers who served in Camp Colt buried in the National Cemetery. There is an infantry soldier from the 1917 camp who's buried in the National Cemetery, so some of them are still here in Gettysburg. Yeah.
What else you got?
Any other questions?
Dan.
Yeah.
Why did they choose a tree for Camp Colt?
I think the rationale was that on this landscape they didn't need another stone monument. They wanted a living memorial. So, and I'll say this: this is a photograph of Mamie Eisenhower with veterans of Camp Colt here in the 1970s. Dug through the archives for y'all.
Thank you. Another round of applause for that.
And if anybody is curious, this is not a good thing for lifting up for everybody to see, but this is the blueprint of Camp Colt, showing the layout of it. So if anybody wants to take a look, I have it right here, but we are located right about here. You can see this is Cushing Avenue, the old War Department Avenue right here by the angle. So if you look right out, right along the road, right where we crossed, that's where the bakery was. Camp Hospital, again, right over there. Ike's headquarters was right where the McDonald's is.
Really?
Yep.
That's convenient.
But again, it stretched from the peach orchard, which you can see off down in that direction, all the way towards the Gettysburg Hospital, South Washington Street.
I was told many years ago that the officers' swimming pool.
Yep. Right behind Kadori. It was there until the 1970s. You ask some of the older park employees about that.
Really?
Yeah.
pretty cool. All right, so we're going to carefully wind our way forward. Guess what? The honeymoon is over. You people are going back in the sun. What we're going to do is we got a couple more stops. We're going to, I'll get in front or Dan will get in front, whoever. We're going to parallel this wall going up until we find a gap in the wall, and we'll cross over, and then we'll head up, and we're basically headed toward Meade's statue for our next stop. We're going to the old Cyclorama Center. The story of that lady, that's why you got rock trivia. You ought to know the story of her. I wonder if you're singing that song.
Oh, she's great, actually.
Yeah, so what happened?
Yes, it's a great recording.
Woo. What were we doing? You didn't think, wait a minute. You didn't think I was going to let you stand here. Oh, no. I have many memories for y'all that I need to impart before it's all gone right here. Some of you, which you're going to be a part of, if you happen to be at this park before 2006. If you visited this park, you'll probably know some of the stuff I'm about to talk about. So let's go. Okay, she's just taking pictures. Let's just go up around the bend.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. A little CCR. What else can we do?
That's right. Rock and roll.
Actually, my favorite Someday Never Comes, and they never play that one on the radio.
No, it's a rare track.
It is a rare track. All right, so we're going to walk up about 50 yards. We're going to get out in the sun. We're going to the old Cyclorama, so we can get out of the sun. This is the old Cyclorama Center, and the way that the Cyclorama Center was built, I'll try to describe it to you if you never saw it. But right over here, I was talking earlier when I was speaking at the Bliss farm, I was talking about Fred Tilburg, and Fred Tilburg would have been working out of the park library, where all that research and all that stuff, if you read books or pamphlets or anything else from the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., a lot of the Ranger papers, etc., that library was posted on this end of the building right here. There was a long hallway that went down through here, and as I'll describe in just a minute, this thing was built to hold the administration. So you had office. When I first got here to Gettysburg back in 1898, something like that. When I got here in 1999, my first boss, who was D. Scott Hartwig, D. Scott, I always wanted to be, I always wanted to be M. Scott. My middle name is, see, you didn't know that, right? I could be M. Scott. Dan didn't think it was funny. All right, so Scott's office was right there in the library, and I walked in there the first time I met him, and I told him, I'm here for your job. And he looked up at me, and I want to tell you 20 years later, he was the supervisor of the Rangers, and I want to tell you 20 years later, you couldn't drive me into his job with a cattle prod. Right there, all right? So here was the library. Here are the offices. Let's walk up a little bit further. Stop right here briefly. I'm going to be a few feet off, but it doesn't really matter. Somewhere in this general vicinity was the front door. All right, so I don't know if this makes sense, but this was your ground level. And before I walk you a little bit further, you may not be able to see, but where you see the ground dropping off on the rear of Cemetery Ridge right here, the modern building, that was your bottom floor. So you could come in, as a lot of you remember, the old visitor center was across the modern day parking lot and literally across the street from the entrance to the National Cemetery. So you could see the electric map, walk through the parking lot all the way down a sidewalk, a portion of which is still out there, and then you would enter, usually most people enter from the back door instead of the front door. But I'm telling you this because I'm about to tell you about the design. what the Cyclorama Center was intended to do was, you came over here to the building, and right here in front of you, behind Ranger Dan, was the big cylinder, which we all know, if you're going to have a cyclorama, you're going to have a cylinder, because the cyclorama is what? It's round, all right? I went on a tour of the painting last night. I backdoored into it. I couldn't believe it. I learned about of the tour after hours at like 3 minutes before it happened, and I was lucky enough. I got behind the scenes, and I learned the word hyperbolic. Thank you. Thank you very much. You can look it up yourself. All right, so the painting was right here, but what I want you to know, when you go and see some of the Rangers that have really, I hate to say this, but I'm still the junior Ranger on this staff.
He's got the toy badge.
I got the toy badge and everything. I'm still the Ranger that's been here the least amount of time, believe that or not. Underneath the drum of the cyclorama were the Ranger offices, and the offices were basically one room, and they sat in a circle, and there was one telephone in the whole building. And sometimes when I, like yesterday or the day before, I went into the modern day park library, opened the door up to the library, and none other than former Ranger Eric Campbell was inside of our modern day library. And this would only happen at Gettysburg. I went and pulled a folder, I believe, I don't know, 111th New York, something like that. I pulled that folder out, and inside there was a letter from Eric Campbell from 1996, addressed to some visitor with this research they were doing he was doing on the 111th New York. Anyway, the point of it is I pulled a piece of paper out, and you remember those old dot printers that went across, and you remember how you had the paper on that, you had to feed them into, I don't know what you call it, the holes on the side, and you had to rip the edges of the paper off. I pulled it out, and it still was on that paper, that thin little tissue paper right there. And I picked it up and I brought over the folder, and Eric was all like, "Oh, y'all forgotten about me." I says, "Look, that old dot printer's right there." All right, let's walk up in the shade. I'll tell you a little bit about that.
So just to, again, bridging the sights here a little bit, this is a photograph former President Eisenhower visiting the Cyclorama building. I believe this would have been, Matt, what month did that open? Do you remember?
I believe 1961 maybe, or?
So I think this was the month it opened to the public. Like visiting the old Cyclorama building here.
It was dedicated on November 19th of 62.
I believe this was, okay.
Rephrase it.
Yeah, rephrase. October of 62, I think. This picture was taken. He was visiting. So, and when Eisenhower was president, when he was retired, he brought a lot of visitors on battlefield tours, and one of the stops on occasion was the visitor center in the Cyclorama. There's a historic photograph of Ike and Monty, who I talked about a little bit ago. Ike and Monty sitting in the first row looking down on the old electric map. So Eisenhower was a favorite visitor here at the Cyclorama building.
All right. Y'all earning your money today, huh? Y'all having fun?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've been in worse. You've been out with me. We've been in worse, a lot worse than this. All right, Cyclorama Center. What is the cyclorama? It's basically a what? It's a painting. In what shape? We already said it.
Circle.
Circle. Okay, so a little bit about the painting. The painting was completed in 1884 in Paris. There was actually several cycloramas. In fact, I can tell you all about it because I saw Chris Brenneman's program last night. And if you ever want to know anything about the cyclorama, I recommend his book, which was published on that, which is sold in the bookstore. This was the second of 4 completed, which were basically the same thing. And I didn't know this, but for instance, we have the Boston edition. That's the one you see here in Gettysburg, the one that hung in Boston.
Boylston Street.
What's the name of it?
It was on Boylston Street.
And my understanding is, I was driving toward this, the
Church.
building still stands, and it's
Yes.
used as what today?
It went from a church to an office building.
Okay, so it's privately owned. I thought it was public. Okay. All right, I didn't know. Okay, so that building still stands. So at some point, I think around 1913, the painting was moved here to Gettysburg. Does anybody know where the original, when it moved here to Gettysburg, where did the painting hang?
East Cemetery Hill.
East Cemetery Hill, where you basically see within a few feet of where the blue water tank is, on East Cemetery Hill is where the original Cyclorama Center was. Now, they needed to do something with this painting, and without illustrations, you really need Chris out here to tell you about it. But the Park Service is going to acquire it in 1941. And when they acquire it, it's already in rough shape. You have to remember that the painting is hanging, just hanging like you would hang a carpet or a canvas from the wall. That's all it's doing, is hanging from the wall. And so they needed a new place. At this time, the Park Service didn't have a new place. So they continued to operate that from 1941. They bought the old building on East Cemetery Hill, and they operated that from 41 to basically 61, 62 when this building is opened. Okay, the original painting which they acquired in 1941 was 356 feet by 28 feet. Now that might not match up with the measurements which you are accustomed to addressing the modern day cyclorama painting into now. The reason for that is they discovered recently.
We are now at the danger zone for the heat index. It's been going for over 2 hours. I need you to wrap this up for safety reasons.
You can wrap it.
Yeah.
Even the Hollywood signal.
The Hollywood signal. They discovered that a couple panels of the painting were missing, right? And so what did they do? This is what your tax dollars, I should say your donations, your ticket sales are going to do. They replaced the the panels on the painting and sewed them back in. And you just really have to see how the original, it's longer now, is what I'm telling you, in this area. All right.
Warm up at McDonald's parking lot.
Yeah, we could. All right, so it's real quick. It was dedicated on November 19th of 1962, and this was the phase of when you go to the Park Service, this is called Mission 66. When you go to Antietam, when you go to Manassas Battlefield, when you see these buildings, these visitor centers, slam in the middle of the battlefield, like the old Cyclorama Center, Mission 66. Maria worked in the old Cyclorama Center. That's where I first met her. The design of the building, it cost $959,603. I knew Maria when she was this tall. $959,603. Now you ain't going to escape without discovering this, because you never saw it. None of you ever saw this. It had a man-made waterfall off the back side of it. Okay, and a sliding glass door that was 2 stories tall that opened to form an amphitheater. And that was on the opposite side. That was that large glass thing. If you happen to see it, we look up pictures of it. Well, guess what? The building shifted, and when the foundation shifted, what happened to the doors?
They didn't fit anymore.
They locked, and luckily they were shut when the building shifted. And so that never worked. Well, the building is designed by Richard Neutra, who was a disciple, basically, or worked for a guy by the name of Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright is known for what?
Waterfalls.
Waterfalls and flat roofs. Well, the caveman figured out pretty quick, flat roof don't work. And so we constantly have water on top of the cylinder and on top of the offices. So what did that lead to?
Leakage.
That's right. The ventilation shafts went under the ground. What did that lead to?
Rust and mold.
That's right, because the water did what?
Sat in them.
That's right. And what happened when they blew air over it?
They spread mold throughout the building.
That's okay. Who breathed that?
People. You.
Maria was over here breathing that bowl. We literally had, she may remember this, we literally had maintenance guys come in here and stick a hose down in the ventilation shaft and pump the water out of it.
All summer.
All summer. You could hear it sometimes. It had a flap down there of some type, and you could hear the water rustling when that flap would close on it. That's crazy, isn't it?
Is that engineer still in business?
I don't know. All right, so we got to hurry up. The philosophy was to make the building as convenient to the historical site as possible. And what they did, the reason I brought you out here, is that they walked out the Cyclorama Center. They walked out to this area, and right over here, I don't know if you've ever seen the marker, there's a marker for the site where Philip Pateau erected the tower to take the pictures that were used to paint the cyclorama. If you're standing in the cyclorama, you're standing in the middle of that grove right there. And so what happened was, or what they planned to, is you see the painting, you walk out the building, bam. Now the pinnacle swung back between Maria and I's career today, and Dan's career, where we went from Mission 66, where it was for the convenience of the visitor, to the portion where the emphasis now is upon restoring the historical landscape. And so now, can't see it because of that tree, they located the visitor center in neutral ground in between the main Union lines. And that's the reason that they did that in that area. All right, a couple of sentences. Architect was Richard Neutra. He was from Vienna. He made his bones in California. He designed such places as the Health House and the Lovell House. If you look those up, those are pretty sharp. I'd like to have those. He was awarded the contract to design the Cyclo Center in 1958. He designed it with a philosophy, or a, I don't know how you'd say it, he wanted architecture to speak history, if that makes sense. And he said he hoped that the building, quote, the sad memory of an internal and still painful rift could, by the erection of a monumental building group on a battlefield and through its new dedication, commemorate what mankind must preserve as a common aim of harmony. The building, quote, must meet the criteria of both a sacred monument and a utilitarian public facility. So final point, right here. We get ready. We had a former superintendent here, was here when Maria and I started, by the name of John Latcher. And John Latcher was responsible for the creation of what we now have as the modern visitor center. It was behind his impetus, and he created quite a few rifts when he decided to demolish the visitor center and the Cyclorama Center. Now what I'm going to leave you with is the final question. And we've been talking today about farmsteads that were here and farmsteads that were not, okay? And camps that are not here, and prisoner of war places. When the Park Service got ready to raise this building, there are so many people that love Gettysburg National Military Park that it instantly became controversial to tear down the old Cyclorama Center. Now there's a different layer of history. The Society of Architectural Historians would feel how on raising the Cyclorama building. Of course they opposed it, including Mr. Neutra's son. The president of the SAH said the building, quote, is among the most exceptional of its genre, and the group tried to get the building listed as a national landmark status by the National Historic Landmark Survey, but failed. The NPS proposed 3 options for this building. All right, they could rehab it. That means we could go in there and dump a load of money in there trying to fix everything about it. We could move it. which we proposed to the people that wanted to save it, that if you come up with the money, you can have it. Or what's the third one?
Third down.
Raise it. R-A-Z-E. So my final question to you is who's right? Now most of us I take for granted because you're standing here, and how hot is it, Maria?
It's hot.
The heat index is 95, your temperature is 90.
It's 90 degrees, it's 95 out here.
Doesn't feel like it now.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like it now. In the shade it does.
All right. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, who's right? Who's right out here? Is it the society that wants to preserve the building because Richard Neutra had, it may be, if I remember correctly, I may be slightly off, but I think it's the only Richard Neutra building, design building, was east of the Mississippi. Well, it was the design was spectacular. The actual working in the thing was horrible, you know, like that. Since you're out here on this hot day, I suppose that you favor the battlefield, and you favor the battlefield over non-historical period buildings. But that, if you're going to run a national park, or if you're going to run a national military park, these are the type decisions in which you're going to have to make. Look at the Rose Barn building. Go into Eisenhower. What was the year the barn burned over there?
Early 90s.
Early 90s. If you go over there, you'll see nothing but stones. And the Park Service, I don't know if there's any talk of ever putting that back together. I mean, how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together after it burns down like that? I mean, what is relevant? What is not on this battlefield? All right, any questions? My gosh, it's 3:30? Okay, I want to thank, unless Dan has anything else to say.
I was just going to say thanks for coming out, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to thank y'all for coming out today. Yes, I'm too tired to applaud myself. I want y'all to know. I want to thank y'all for coming out today. Keep checking the park website. As Dan was saying, he's got the Eisenhower. You told him when the Eisenhower farm's reopening and stuff.
Well, we're open 7 days a week. The house is reopening May 27th.
On May 27th, you can start returning back out there. Chris, my boss, not the Cyclorama Chris, but the MPS Chris, should have the list out of our upcoming programs for the summer here shortly. Tom Holbrook, my co-worker, is going to be cranking up Living History every other weekend shortly here too. And as you can tell, ladies and gentlemen, pan the camera over here, Stuff Rider. Law enforcement has already cranked up right here. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.